Well, a major pro-Palestinian march will go ahead in London tomorrow on Armistice Day, the 11th of November, despite the government being under pressure to ban it. More than 70,000 people are expected to take part, but organisers insist the protest won't clash with remembrance services or go past the cenotaph. Police chiefs have cancelled leave, extended overtime and drafted in 1,000 more officers from across Britain to reinforce their ranks. Well, joining me now is the veteran Pete Elliot. He served 14 years in the Army and a further 8 years in the Royal Air Force. He also served in the Gulf War, in Northern Ireland and in Iraq. Pete, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it. And you're very welcome to the programme, and thank you for your service to our country. What do you think should happen tomorrow, Pete?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on and giving me a platform. I think that tomorrow we should be having a peaceful protest. I think that the ceremonies around the Armistice Day should be going ahead. I don't think there shouldn't be any conflict between the two. And in fact, having a protest asking for a ceasefire and for an armistice on Armistice Day, to me, seems utterly logical. So yeah, I think totally, I don't believe that there will be, from the protesters or from the Armistice March side of things, I don't think there's going to be violence. So far, there's been minimal issues on the very large-scale protests that we've already had. And it has seemed like some of the media has focused in on a few of the arrests compared to the tens of thousands of marches that have been on those protests.
But the minority, Pete, is infecting the majority, isn't it? And if you are someone who has taken part in that march, you will know that there are people who support Hamas, there are people who are Iranian agents, there are people who've shouted jihad. For example, that may well only be a handful of people or a very small number of the 70,000 plus people tomorrow who are expected to turn up. But nonetheless, you're associated with that, aren't you?
Well, I don't personally feel that I'm associated with that, and I resent that to quite a lot, because I'm not, and that's exactly.
Have you been on the marches yourself, Pete?
Sorry?
Have you been on any of these marches yourself, Pete?
Yeah, I have. But I think that what it's reflecting is 76% of the population are supporting a ceasefire in Palestine, and what we've got is our government, both Tories and Labour, who are not calling for that ceasefire. They're calling for a pause, which it's a joke. We need peace in the region. We need to stop the oppression of the Palestinians, so that the Palestinians feel that they then need to react to their situation. And I think that the calls for peace is what we need, and we need a ceasefire which will lead to talks and then peace.
What about these
until our government?
Sorry to interrupt you, Pete. What about these humanitarian pauses, these 4-hour windows for aid to get in, for people to get out of Gaza, for example? That will help, won't it?
It will help for a while, but I mean, just picture the situation. You're in Gaza. You've got 4 hours now. Do you take on food and water, or do you get out? I mean, I personally cannot see how they can help. If you're moving Hamas alongside the civilian population out, you're just shifting the problem. These are not targeted attacks against Hamas. These are. It feels to me like genocide, where Israel are strafing the whole of Gaza and forcing people out and killing thousands of men, women, and children. And we know that 40% of the population of Gaza are children. And this is a disproportionate reaction. I understand how the Israelis must feel, or I don't understand. We saw it with 9/11 and the shock of what happened there. But with what we're seeing here is it's an overreaction, and I think that we need to take stock. 9/11 resulted in.
I mean, it's not an overreaction to defend your country, Israel doing what they're doing. But in terms of, I mean, I'm sure, look, I don't want any civilians to die in Israel or in Gaza. There are many, many people in Gaza who live a horrible life anyway, but at the moment things are very, very difficult. But I just wonder how a march in London, especially on Armistice Day. OK, there may not be near one another. Let's hope everything is totally peaceful and nothing happens tomorrow and both marches go off, both the pro-Palestinian march and the Armistice Day commemorations are all very, very peaceful and nothing happens. But to many people, the very fact that that protest marches you've been on, Pete, are happening is offensive to them. Can you not see that from their perspective, perhaps, even as a veteran?
So, I mean, as a veteran, I mean, and we fought 2 world wars so that people could have the right to protest, to march, to speak freely.
But does it have to happen tomorrow, Pete? I mean, they've made their point for 4 weeks in a row. There have been problems. There has been violence. There have been police officers injured, for example, by fireworks being fired into the crowd. I'm not saying for a second that the tens of thousands of people who go on that march are doing that. And I don't agree with Suella Braverman that they are hate marches per se. I don't think every single person has hate in their heart who is taking part in that march. I wouldn't say for a second that you do, and many other people who I'm sure you've gone on those marches with do. But there are people who find even the fact that it is happening very offensive. What's your perspective on that?
So, I mean, you mentioned Suella Braverman and elements of the media as well. I mean, this has been whipped up. I mean, if there are going to be problems, it's because people have, you know, there has been so much talk about this. It has been whipped up by certain elements.
But there have been problems before it being, I mean, you say it's been whipped up by certain elements, and some people, I'm not saying you do necessarily, but some people say that the Mayor of London, certainly Sadiq Khan, has said that Suella Braverman and others have whipped this up. But actually, from day one, from the first pro-Palestinian march 4 weeks ago, there have been problems, there has been violence, there have been people breaking the law.
Again, it's not the vast majority.
But the minority are infecting the majority here, and even though it is a minority, that is what people are thinking about, talking about, who are not, and the media are reporting because it's news, that are taking part in these marches, and that is how these marches are being tarred.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the media are reporting that, and the media are, you know, that they are putting such an emphasis on that small minority, when actually the big story should be the fact that we've got tens of thousands of people giving up their Saturday to go and protest at what's happening in Palestine.
When people are violent and when people attack police officers, when people shout for jihad, when people bounce effigies of dead babies with blood on them on a Palestinian flag, that is news. There's no doubt about that. And you're part of a protest where people are doing that. I don't think for a second that you would do any of that. But don't you think that, I mean, people will say and people will think that because anybody who goes on that protest, as totally peaceful and well-intentioned as you are, and I'm sure many others are as well, that they're nonetheless associated with that because it's part of the same protest?
Look, I don't support effigies of dead babies being thrown around, but I would rather effigies of dead babies than dead babies. You know, I want to see peace in Palestine, and that's what 76% of this country want to see. And this is why tens of thousands of people are going to be in London tomorrow to march from Hyde Park down to the American Embassy.
OK, I want to bring in Candace Holdsworth, writer and commentator, who's with me right throughout the show. What do you make of Pete's perspective there?
Well, I understand his perspective, but I would just say, do you disavow those people on the marches with you who have been making anti-Semitic statements?
Well, he does. I mean, Pete clearly does. Pete clearly has absolutely nothing to do with those people. But it is a question, really, for everybody who's on those marches.
Yeah, it is. And also, I mean, I disagree that they're committing genocide. I don't think Israel is committing genocide. I don't think they're setting out to eliminate the people of Palestine.
That's Pete's perspective, though. Pete, you've used the word genocide to describe what Israel is saying. Why have you used that word? It's a very strong word and a very pertinent word, especially in this context. So,
I mean, we've had a number of commentators that have used the word genocide over the last few weeks. It's not just my view. My understanding is that they are trying to, and Israeli politicians have come out with lines saying that they're not targeting, they are trying to obliterate, and it's just trying to create as much chaos there as possible. Now, what I do want to see is I want to see that following this...
Those Israeli politicians, sorry to interrupt you, Pete, but those Israeli politicians, for example, the nutcase who called for a nuclear bomb to be used, by the way, that would have devastating effects for the people of Israel, never mind the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
You know, he has been slapped down, he has been suspended by Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm not defending everything that Benjamin Netanyahu does, but there has been a clear attempt by the Israeli military to try to focus on Hamas. Not every single thing they have done has been correct, of course, but nonetheless they are acting in many ways like a responsible state in a way that Hamas terrorists absolutely are not. I know you're not defending them, but genocide, is that really the right word to use, Pete?
Well, I would like to see the evidence, and I think that there is a lot of misinformation. I mean, the fog of war, first thing to go is the sort of, you know, is the truth, isn't it? And what we do need to do is we need to look at all of the evidence in front of us. Where there have been war crimes committed and human rights abuses committed, then we need to get that evidence. And I believe that we should be trying those perpetrators of that in international courts. And you know, from what I've seen, the situation looks absolutely horrific. I mean, you showed clips earlier on of the devastation of Gaza, and I was just like, you know, I can only imagine. I mean, what...
It is horrendous, Pete. We've got to go to a break, but I just want to ask you a final question. So will you be marching tomorrow as well?
Yes, I will be down there tomorrow.
Okay.
And I just want, you know, I want to hear calls for an immediate ceasefire from our political leaders, because that's the only way we're going to start to solve this problem. And I also want to stop us selling our arms and munitions to Israel, because they are now getting used to kill people.
Pete, thanks very much. We'll no doubt speak to you more on this at some stage in the future. Pete Elliot, thank you very, very much.